Shalom, and welcome to another episode of Ezra International's It's All About the Aliyah. This is the program for people who really want to know what God is doing in our generation. Ezra International has been helping the poorest of the poor Jewish people for over 25 years now. We help them make it home to the land of Israel, the land of their promise. Hi, I'm your host, Gary Christopher, and today we're going to do another country profile, because I find with doing a country profile, looking at the trends, the current events, the history of these countries, we get to look at the cycle of Aliyah. And the cycle of Aliyah is really a fulfillment of God's faithfulness to his promise he made to Abraham. Remember, I told you God made a promise, a covenant with Abraham, an oath that he swore to Isaac and confirmed with Jacob. And we're getting to see the faithfulness of that covenant, because no matter where God scattered his people throughout the ends of the earth, we know because of the Abrahamic covenant that they will come home in the latter days. And that's the day that we're living in. Before we talk about the country that I've chosen today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about country representatives. If it wasn't for the representatives working in these individual nations, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. We look for indigenous believers, people who have a love for God and have a love for the work that they do. Believe me, nobody is getting rich off of this work. These are humble, just God-fearing, God-loving individuals who are doing this work. No superstars, no celebrities, and yet they are ordinary people doing extraordinary things in all of the countries that we are working in. One of the greatest things that happened to me early on, after I was familiar with Ezra International in the sense that as a pastor, I supported the work, and my wife and I supported financially from our own finances the work, and then later became a part-time representative myself. And it was during one of those representative meetings that I was able to attend that I had the best experience that I could with the people that do the work every day on the ground, the boots on the ground. I went to, of course, all the formal meetings, but then thanks to our field operations manager, Pat Frame, I was able to meet with the representatives in each, people from the countries. Countries like Russia, of course, we were in Ukraine, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Georgia. Those representatives were all there for this meeting. And one by one, I got to sit with them and hear their story, mostly through the interpreter. I heard their hearts and their life story and the work that they were doing. One of the things that became very apparent from these testimonials is that most of the Jewish people that were dealing with or were working with these representatives were finding that this was the first time that they had been treated with kindness from a Christian. The Jewish people that our representatives are working with had never been treated with kindness from a Christian before. What a sad indictment on the church, or the so-called church of the region. But when Ezra representatives go humbly serving these Jewish people and helping them through the Aliyah process, they're experiencing a true face of what a Christian should be. Romans chapter 15, verse 8 says this about Yeshua, or we know him in the church as Jesus the Christ, or Jesus Christ. But it says this: "Now I say that Jesus Christ has become a servant to the circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made to the fathers." Do you know that is exactly what our representatives are doing? Number one, becoming a servant to the circumcision, that referring to the Jewish people, serving and humbly administering to their every need when it comes to this Aliyah and beyond. And then also reminding these people of the promises made to their fathers. That God made the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would not only be God to them, but they would have a place to call their own. And so when we tell them that they have a right to go to Israel, sometimes it's the first time that they've ever heard that they had that promise. And of course, the right of return laws from the state of Israel align with that promise, that covenant promise that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we are not only ministering to them as servants, humbly coming to them and helping them out, but we're also reminding them of the word of God, the promise made to their forefathers. I think that is a beautiful picture of how to emulate Jesus in their lives. So if we are true disciples of Jesus, we should be doing what he did. Not what would Jesus do, what did he do? And then do it. And that's what our representatives are all about. And that's what it drew me in. It drew me into this work. Not only did I want to help finance this work, which I was already doing, but I wanted to be a part of that. And later became full-time with Ezra International, largely due to the example that the people of Ezra International had already displayed. All right. So God said he would scatter his people. I have to once again remind us of that, because how do we go to reading about them regathered if we don't know how it is that they've been scattered into the nations? Deuteronomy 28 gives the promises for obedience to God, and then also gives the curses to disobedience to God. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 64 and 65 says this: "Then the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. And among those nations you shall find no rest, nor shall the sole of your foot have a resting place, but there the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing eyes, and anguish of soul." But the promise of the Abrahamic covenant, God would also remind them of this in Deuteronomy 30, chapter 30, verse 4. "If any of you are driven out to the farthest under heaven, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you. Then the Lord your God will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers." But praise God for the promise that God made, that unconditionally he would keep this promise no matter what the Jewish people could do. He would eventually bring them back to their land, and he would bring them back to stay. You know, the places that the Jewish people end up going are only temporary places of refuge, because eventually anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, through economic turmoil or war or even pandemics. Even the current plague or pandemic that we're seeing today is causing more of the anti-Semitism to arise, even to the point where in some places the Jews are being accused of starting this pandemic. But God said through his prophets he would bring them back. Azerbaijan is the country that we're going to be talking about today, and it is northeast of Israel. Isaiah 43:6 says, "I will say to the north, give them up, and say to the south, do not keep them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth." This is Isaiah understanding the promise that God made, and sharing the fact that no matter where they would go, God would bring them back. Azerbaijan, as I said, is northeast of Israel, and it was part of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, many countries declared their sovereignty. And in 1989, that's what Azerbaijan did. And it declared its independence on August 30th, 1991. I remind you of this because, during the 80s, people were praying for the Soviet Union. People were praying for the Jewish people of the Soviet Union, and reminding God of his promise, like the one here in Isaiah, that he would bring them back. And so it's important for us to understand the day we're living in so we know how to intercede, how to pray. And so, again, many were praying in the 80s that God would eventually let his people out of these countries. And that's exactly what he did. When the Iron Curtain fell and the Soviet Union dissolved, country after country, people were able to come home. And Azerbaijan joined those countries that were allowing Jewish people to return home. Azerbaijan is a country that has a population of Jewish people that can trace their roots all the way back to the first dispersion. Not every country can say that. They are one. They can trace the Jewish population all the way back to the Babylonian dispersion and the destruction of the temple in 586 BC. So their ancestors in Azerbaijan settled in the mountain regions. They settled in what is today northwestern part of Iran. But that was the original settlement, and they were dispersed in other regions of the country. Remember, not everyone is from the first dispersion, but Azerbaijan is one. And believe it or not, I talked to you the last time about Argentina, and I don't know if I remember to share this fact, but the Iberian Peninsula, where many of those who fled the Spanish Inquisition, got its name from the word Ivrit or Iberia. The peninsula that Jewish people fled, and I bring this up because the Iberian Peninsula was also a place where Jewish people sought refuge from the Babylonian captivity. Azerbaijan is one, and the Iberian Peninsula is another. But it became known, the Iberian Peninsula became known as the Iberian Peninsula from the word Ivrit, Hebrew. Ivrit, Iberian, Iberian. That's how it came to us. So you see, Jewish populations that fled the destruction or being overtaken by another kingdom, distributed throughout the region, and this in the first dispersion, and it happened again in the second dispersion. Okay, so as I said, Azerbaijan became a temporary place of refuge. We'll understand more about that in a moment. But in the 19th century, the czars of Russia, wanting to spread culture into the kingdom, sent Ashkenazi Jews into Azerbaijan. But it also became a place of refuge during the Holocaust in Europe. When it comes to the Holocaust, any place was better than what was happening in Europe, in Nazi Germany, and in much of Europe. So Azerbaijan became a temporary or refuge for those who were fleeing the Holocaust. Now, again, remember, temporary refuge. There's a cycle, and there's Israel, there's dispersion into country after country, and then the cycle of return. When it comes full circle, Jewish people return to Israel. But for now, there are still Jewish people living in Azerbaijan. The majority of them are living in the capital of Baku. According to the census of 2009, and it's a wide range depending on who you're reading or where you're reading, but from between 5 and 30,000 Jewish people still live in Azerbaijan. The vast majority of this country is Muslim. In fact, 96% of the population is Muslim, with only a 3% Christian population. And then the Jewish population is estimated at around 0.11, very, very small. But according to Amos 9:9, God will sift the house of Israel from everywhere. And he says not one grain will fall to the ground, and he will sift them out and bring them back to the land of Israel. In fact, Azerbaijan has a very good relationship with Israel, making it one of the few Muslim countries that has this kind of working relationship with Israel. It includes cooperation in trade and security matters, and even cultural and educational exchanges. The security services in Azerbaijan have actually foiled terrorist attacks directed at Jewish institutions, not necessarily from people within Azerbaijan, but from forces from without. And I'll talk about where those terrorist attacks are emanating from in just a moment. But let's take a break right here. We'll pause for a commercial, and we'll be right back.
See, I will bring them from the land of the north and gather them from the ends of the earth. Among them will be the blind and the lame, expectant mothers, and women in labor. A great throng will return. Jeremiah 31:8.
Ezra International has helped thousands, like Olim the Blind from Ukraine and Giergu from Hungary. Little Vadim, who is going blind, is now getting the help he needs in Israel thanks to Ezra International. Jewish families around the world hear the call to return to their homeland. Their prophets foretold long ago that the return to Israel in our time would be a miracle, and it is greater even than the exodus from Egypt under Moses. The prophets also foretold another calling for our time, to the Gentiles, to those of us from among the nations. It is a call that Ezra International responds to each and every day by providing humanitarian aid to impoverished Jewish families. You can answer that call too. A gift of only $30 per month for a year can help Ezra International and return a poor Jewish person, restoring them to the land of their promise. Call the number below or visit EzraInternational.org and give your gift of hope today.
Okay, before the break, I mentioned that Azerbaijan had a good working relationship with Israel, and we also have a working relationship with the Jewish agency. Ezra International has been in Azerbaijan since the year 2000. Now, we have helped over 1,900 Jewish people leave Azerbaijan, and the problem in this country is poverty. There's a lot of unemployment, a lot of poverty, and this has influenced many to want to make Aliyah. And so we're currently working in the country, and then we'll talk a moment about the backlog that is building in Azerbaijan. But I want to talk a moment about this poverty. I mentioned in previous episodes about Matthew chapter 25. Jesus himself, Yeshua, said that what you do to the least of these, my brethren, you do to me. And this is what we're finding. He said, if you're hungry, when I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. I was in prison and you visited me. These are things that we feel that we're doing every day with the residents, the Jewish residents of Azerbaijan. They're hungry, they're thirsty, they're strangers in a foreign land. We're ministering to their need, and I believe that that's exactly what Jesus would have us to do. Minister to the least of these, his brethren. All right. One of the things that's unique about working with in Ezra International, because we're in countries that are sometimes at war with each other, we're in both countries. This is the case in Ukraine and Russia. It's also the case in Azerbaijan and Armenia. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been in war footing since the 80s. And there's a disputed territory called Nagorno-Karabakh. Karabakh, excuse me, not an easy name to pronounce. Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a region that is disputed, and it's the region where our representative Diana is from. A representative in Azerbaijan is a native to that region, and she remembers when Armenia and Azerbaijan were at war, having as a child to hide under her kitchen table. And it's still causes problems in this country today. There are a number of Jewish people in Azerbaijan of Armenian heritage, and even it can be very difficult for them to make Aliyah. Even if they are married to someone in Azerbaijan, the authorities treat them differently than they would anybody else from Azerbaijan. And this can mean more money, it can mean more energy spent in trying to get Jewish people of this heritage out of the region. And, Diana tells us there's still a lot of animosity, but she is fearless. She is fearless. I highlight her because I met her in that meeting I spoke to you about in the beginning of this program, and she was only 19 years old when she started doing this work. I think I met her, she was in her early 20s, and she has been fearless the entire time working in this region that oftentimes she is not the most popular of people. Another thing that is important to understand about Azerbaijan is one of its neighbors is Iran. And not only are they at war footing with Armenia, but Iran is the source of the anti-Semitic attacks that I spoke to you a moment ago. There's Jewish organizations and Israeli organizations in Azerbaijan that have mainly attributed the attacks to Iran when it comes to the violence or anti-Semitism, because when you ask somebody in Azerbaijan, is there anti-Semitism, and they will tell you no, but Iran is the source of this hatred. Iran tells the Jewish people in their own country, we don't hate you, we just hate Israel. Well, this is a veiled form of anti-Semitism in Iran, and it's even though there's no anti-Semitism to speak of in Azerbaijan, this is where the problem comes from. In fact, when you ask and as a Jewish person from Azerbaijan, they get offended and say, no, there's no anti-Semitism. They've been there so long, and there's such a good relationship within the country that they see it as no anti-Semitism at all. But the problem comes from Iran. But this does make Azerbaijan a very rare country. Now, we are still facing many challenges in the country, largely due today to COVID. Now, at the time of this filming, there are still quarantines in Azerbaijan, and there are still great challenges that we face. In fact, there are 200 people at last count who are waiting to get their papers, waiting for their consular visits, and it's almost impossible to get them to the capital of Baku because of the travel restrictions. And there have been some consular visits online, but it makes it very, very difficult for the full Aliyah process, because the entire family has to go to the consular visits. And as of this summer of 2020, again, as this is being filmed, the streets are very difficult to get through. In fact, going onto the street was only possible with the permission of, and you have to do this 2 hours beforehand. You have to send a text with your passport information to the government and get permission to go out on the street. And it's only after you do this that you have the right to leave your home to go to a shop, to the pharmacy, or even just to take a walk. And you definitely have to have permission to get in a car. So due to these quarantines and increased checkpoints, this process of getting people to their consular visits has become very, very difficult. And these as of this filming, these quarantines are still in place. And Jewish families are living in regions outside of Baku are finding it almost impossible to get the whole family to these consular visits. So this is a problem. Our teams have been asking for prayer. As we call them, the fishermen in Azerbaijan want prayer for wisdom and safety in all of this travel, and for the Jewish people with the Armenian connections to ask for God's favor, that they would find favor with the administrations there, because again, it's making it very difficult because of this bias against them. The law today is saying also that you cannot travel by night in a bus. And so Jewish families who are trying to do their consular visits, often we're having to get them to the city of Baku, have them spend the night, and then do their consular visits the next day. That's costing us more money. It's costing more work for our representatives. And so we need prayer for that. The Jewish communities, we just want to pray for their safety and for peace and security against the terrorist attacks that, as I mentioned a moment ago, and then just to get through this process. We know that God will and is working even through a pandemic, but we want to know, or at least let you know, how to pray intelligently, how to pray for the needs in this country. Our call, as I've told you before, is the call of Isaiah 49:22. God is reaching out to those in the nations, that's you and I, and our representatives in these nations, to help the Jewish people. Isaiah 49:22 says, "Thus says the Lord our God, behold, I will lift my hand in an oath to the nations and set up my standard for the peoples. They shall bring your sons in their arms, and their daughters shall be carried on their shoulders." If you're a parent or a grandparent, you don't trust anybody, just anybody, with your kids or your grandkids to carry them or to hold them on your shoulders. This is an intimate appeal from God through Isaiah to people like you and I that have a heart for the Jewish people and would love them and not harm them in any way, but help them through this Aliyah process, help them to get home to the nation of their promise. And I once again turn to you, if you're a fan of this program, if you've been watching this program, or if you're watching it for the first time. Become a friend of Ezra International. You can go to our website, ezrainternational.org, and you can see how you too can pray for us. You can look at the stories of all the people that we've been helping. We've helped over 77,000 Jewish people get home to Israel, and you can become a donor. If you can become a donor, just a one-time gift or a monthly basis, you can help Jewish people escape these impoverished situations, places of notoriously anti-Semitic behavior, terrorist attacks, economic collapse. It's causing poverty beyond our wildest imaginations. All these things are playing a part in why Jewish people need to get out of the countries that they're in today. And it also is in fulfillment of God's promise to them, in fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant, and in fulfillment of the prophecies that said they would come home in these last days. If you want to know what God is doing and you want to be a part of it, just look no further than the Aliyah. It's all about the Aliyah today. God bless you. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.